The stars above the forest rearranged themselves into symbols they didn't recognize. At first, Elias thought it was a trick of cold and fatigue. He had been hiking since dusk, chasing the last thread of a trail that had vanished somewhere behind him, swallowed by pine needles and shadow. The forest lay far from any road or light, a basin of black trees cupping the night. His breath steamed faintly in the air, each exhale a soft cloud that drifted and disappeared. The cold had a sharpness to it, a metallic edge that bit at his fingers even through gloves. He stopped in a clearing no wider than a house, ringed by tall spruce whose tops vanished into darkness. The ground dipped slightly, collecting mist that clung to his boots. Somewhere, water moved over stone, slow, patient, unseen. Above him, the sky was clear enough to show the stars in hard, merciless detail. Elias tilted his head back and tried to orient himself. He knew the constellations well enough. Orion should have been rising low to the east by now. The Big Dipper should have been easy, even through the trees. But the sky felt wrong. The stars were there, bright and innumerable. Yet they didn't sit where his memory insisted they should. He narrowed his eyes, focusing on a familiar cluster. It shimmered, not with the normal twinkle of atmosphere, but with a subtle sliding motion, as if the points of light were beads on invisible threads. A wind whispered through the clearing, rustling needles high above. The sound died quickly, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. No insects chirred, no owl called. Even the distant water seemed to hold its breath. Elias swallowed. He had the sudden, irrational thought that the forest was listening. He watched as 3 stars drifted closer together, their alignment tightening. Another pair slid away, opening a gap where there shouldn't have been one. The movement was slow, deliberate, unmistakable. The stars were rearranging themselves. A symbol began to form, angles and curves traced in cold light. It didn't resemble any constellation, any letter, any sigil he had ever seen. It hurt to look at directly, not with pain exactly, but with a crawling pressure behind his eyes, as if his brain were straining against a shape it couldn't resolve. "Okay," he whispered, his voice sounding too loud in the clearing. "Okay." His breath fogged, then thinned. He realized he was holding it. The trees around him creaked. Not the usual groan of trunks shifting in the night breeze, but a deeper sound, like wood under slow, immense stress. Elias lowered his gaze. The nearest spruce leaned inward by a fraction, its top bowing toward the center of the clearing. Another followed, and another. The forest was bending. Elias took a step back, boots crunching softly. The sound echoed too much, bouncing between trunks in a way that made the clearing feel larger than it was, stretched thin. His headlamp flickered when he turned it on, the beam cutting a weak cone through the mist. Shadows leaped and lengthened unnaturally, stretching away from him like dark fingers. A sudden crash erupted from the undergrowth to his left. Something large barreled through brush and saplings, fleeing without direction. He caught only a glimpse of fur and white-rimmed eyes before it vanished. Another animal followed, then another, deer, maybe, or elk, moving with blind panic, as if chased by something that had no shape. The symbol overhead completed itself. The moment it did, the temperature dropped further, the cold pressing down like a weight. Elias felt it in his teeth, in the hollow at the base of his throat. The symbol pulsed once, a slow dimming and brightening, and with it came a sensation of being noticed. Not watched, not observed, recognized. Elias's thoughts scattered. Memories flickered through his mind. Campfires, maps, the reassuring grid of city streets, each one feeling fragile, like paper held too close to flame. He tried to tell himself that the sky was vast, indifferent, incapable of intention. But the symbol above him contradicted that belief simply by existing. Another symbol began to form beside the first. This one was larger, its lines longer, stretching across a swath of sky that should have held dozens of unrelated stars. The points of light slid into place as if guided by unseen hands. The space between them darkened, not empty but thick, as though the sky itself were bruising. The forest responded. Leaves trembled without wind. Bark split with soft, wet sounds. Roots pushed subtly against the soil, reshaping the ground in slow, creeping motions. Elias staggered as the earth dipped beneath his feet, the clearing elongating, its edges pulling away like taffy. His sense of direction collapsed. North meant nothing here. Distance folded in on itself. He tried to move toward the trees, away from the open sky, but the clearing seemed to widen with each step. The stars loomed larger overhead, pressing down. The symbols multiplied, interlocking shapes, repeating motifs that suggested pattern without revealing meaning. His mind skidded across them, unable to find purchase. Something whispered his name. It didn't come from any one direction. It resonated through the clearing, through the soil, through his bones. The voice was not sound so much as implication, a pressure that carried familiarity without warmth. Elias clamped his hands over his ears. It didn't help. The shadows at his feet thickened, stretching toward the center of the clearing even though the light above came from directly overhead. His shadow detached slightly, lagging behind his movements, as if reluctant to follow. "Please," he said, unsure who or what he was speaking to. Above him, one of the symbols rotated. The motion was subtle, almost polite, but it sent a wave of vertigo through him. The trees groaned louder now, their tops bending farther inward. Needles rained down, pattering against his jacket like dry rain. The mist thickened, swirling in slow spirals that mirrored the patterns in the sky. Elias understood then that the symbols were not meant to be seen from below. They were not messages for human eyes. They were tools, marks left by something vast, something ancient, adjusting its grip on the shape of things. The forest was being measured. A final symbol flared into existence directly above the clearing center. This one felt different, heavier, more complete. As it stabilized, the unnatural silence broke. Every animal sound returned at once in a discordant rush. Wings beating, bodies crashing through brush, distant howls layered atop one another. Then, abruptly, all sound cut off again, like a switch thrown. The symbol dimmed. Elias felt the pressure lift slightly, enough for him to draw a full breath. The trees eased back, their trunks straightening with soft cracks and pops. The ground firmed beneath his boots. The mist thinned. The stars froze. For a long moment, nothing happened. Elias stood trembling, afraid to move, afraid to look away. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat echoing too loudly in the quiet. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his gaze from the sky. The clearing looked almost normal again. The trees stood upright. The shadows lay where they should. His headlamp steadied, its beam brightening. Relief flooded him, weak and unsteady. He laughed once, a short, broken sound. Then he noticed the marks on the ground. The soil at the center of the clearing was pressed flat, as if something immense had rested there. Around it, the pine needles formed patterns, curving lines and sharp angles that matched, perfectly, the last symbol he had seen in the sky. Elias backed away, his heel catching on a root that hadn't been there before. He fell hard, knocking the breath from his lungs. As he scrambled upright, the symbol overhead flickered faintly, just once. This time it didn't rearrange. It reflected. Far above the forest, the stars held their positions, cold and patient. And somewhere within that vast, watching dark, something finished taking note of where it had been, and where it would return. They found a trail of blood leading into the woods, but no signs of a struggle. It began at the edge of the service road, where gravel gave way to loam and leaf rot. Mara was the first to notice it. She stopped so suddenly that Jonah walked into her back, muttering an apology that died in his throat when he followed her stare. The beam of her flashlight rested on a dark line cutting cleanly through the pale dust, too narrow to be a spill, too deliberate to be an accident. Blood, fresh enough to glisten. The forest pressed close around the road, black trunks and tangled undergrowth swallowing what little twilight remained. The air had turned sharp with cold, the kind that slid under collars and settled in the lungs. Somewhere deep in the trees, something moved, then went still. "Do you see any drag marks?" Jonah asked quietly. Mara crouched, careful not to step too close. The blood didn't pool. It didn't smear. It formed a thin, continuous ribbon that vanished between the trees like a drawn line. No scuffed earth. No broken branches. No footprints leading toward it or away. "It's like," she hesitated, "like it started walking on its own." Behind them, Eli shifted his weight, boots crunching softly. He'd been quiet since they'd left the truck, radio static still crackling faintly at his hip. "No struggle," he said. "Nothing. If someone was hurt enough to bleed this much, there'd be signs," Jonah finished. The metallic scent reached them then, sharp and unmistakable, carried on a faint breeze that stirred the leaves overhead. The trees whispered as the wind passed through, but the sound felt contained, muffled, as though the forest were holding itself close. The trail angled inward, threading between two pines that leaned subtly toward each other, their branches nearly touching. Beyond them, the woods thickened, shadows stacking upon shadows. Mara straightened, her light wavering. "We should mark the spot," she said. "Call it in." Eli glanced back toward the road. It already seemed farther away than it should have been, the truck's silhouette blurred by darkness and drifting mist. "Radio's been acting up all night," he said. "But yeah, we don't follow this." None of them moved. The bloodline pulsed faintly in the beam of Mara's flashlight. Not moving, just present. A guide. Jonah felt a strange pull in his chest, a sense of direction that had nothing to do with training or reason. The trail knew where it was going. A sudden crash sounded deeper in the woods. Something large bolted through brush, branches snapping in frantic retreat. Another followed, then another, deer, maybe, or something else moving too fast to see clearly. The forest reacted in ripples, motion cascading outward from a point ahead of them. "Animals are spooked," Jonah said. "Whatever happened, it's recent." Or ongoing, Mara thought but didn't say. Against her better judgment, she took a step closer. The blood trail crossed the threshold into the trees without hesitation, slipping over roots and stones without breaking its line. The ground beneath it looked undisturbed, as if the forest itself had parted to let it pass. Her reflection flashed in something wet at the edge of the trail. She frowned, angling her light. It wasn't water. It was blood, glossy enough to mirror her face, except the reflection lagged a fraction of a second behind her movement. Her reflected eyes lifting after hers had already done so. Mara recoiled. "Did you see that?" Jonah knelt, peering where she pointed. His own reflection stared back at him, mouth slightly open, breathing out of sync. He stood abruptly. "We're done. We mark it and go." Eli didn't respond. They turned to look at him. He stood a few paces back, head tilted, listening. His flashlight pointed straight down, illuminating his boots and the forest floor. "Do you hear that?" he asked. They strained. At first, there was nothing. Just the hush of wind through needles, the distant creak of wood cooling in the night. Then, faintly, a sound threaded through the silence. Footsteps, slow, measured, coming from ahead, deeper in the trees. Jonah's hand went to his radio. Static answered, then a whisper that almost formed words. The footsteps stopped. The blood trail shimmered again, and for an instant, it seemed thicker, darker, as if more had been added without any drop falling. The line curved slightly, adjusting its course, angling around a fallen log that none of them remembered being there a moment ago. The trees leaned in just a little. "Someone's there," Mara said, though she couldn't see anything beyond the reach of her light. "They're hurt." The whisper came again, clearer this time. Sounded like Eli's voice. "Mara," it said from the woods ahead. "Help me." They all froze. Eli's head snapped up. "That wasn't me." The blood trail pulsed, brightening, and the metallic scent intensified until Jonah tasted it at the back of his throat. The footsteps resumed, matching the cadence of a human walk, but never quite entering the light. "Mara," the voice called again, closer now. "It's cold." Mara felt her feet move before she decided to. One step, then another, drawn by something that felt like familiarity. The trail led her perfectly between the trees, never wavering, never breaking. She sensed Jonah reaching for her arm, felt his fingers brush her sleeve, and then the forest seemed to stretch. The distance between them elongated, space thinning like pulled glass. Jonah's face looked suddenly far away, distorted by shadow. His shout came muffled, as though heard through water. "Mara! Stop!" She stopped, heart pounding, and the forest snapped back into place. Jonah stumbled forward, nearly colliding with her. "Did you feel that?" he gasped. Eli stood where he was, eyes fixed on the trail. "It's leading somewhere," he said softly. "It wants us to follow." "No," Mara said. "It wants to separate us." The voice ahead laughed quietly, a sound that tried very hard to be human. The trees creaked in response, branches lowering as if to listen. Somewhere above them, something reflected light that wasn't there, a shimmer moving between leaves. The blood trail ended abruptly in a small clearing. At its center lay nothing. No body, no sign of injury, just bare earth, pressed smooth, with a dark circle soaked deep into the soil. Around it, the bloodline looped back on itself, forming a rough outline of a person standing upright. Mara's breath caught. The outline was her height, her shape. Behind them, the forest closed in, shadows thickening, paths subtly rearranging. The road was gone. The truck was gone. The clearing felt like the only stable point in a world that no longer agreed on its dimensions. The voice spoke one last time, now directly behind her ear, perfectly matching her own. "You followed it so well." The blood in the clearing darkened, spreading outward in thin, precise lines that reached for their feet. And somewhere deeper in the woods, something took its first step back toward the road, leaving no signs of a struggle at all.